Hello and welcome to our first edition of Office Hours. I am Meghan Dotter. I am CEO of Portico. We are a communication training firm, and I'm author of The Reluctant Presenter. And I'm here today with my niece. You might notice a similarity of the last name, Ryan Dotter, who in her own right is a communication expert. And we're launching this channel, Office Hours, to bring to you some of the conversations that Ryan and I have had at family gatherings on one-on-one when we're texting each other about her looking for advice about what to do because she is newer in her work life experience. And so we wanted to bring some of the challenges that she's facing and some of her friends and colleagues and give you some answers. So Ryan, welcome. It is wonderful as always to see you.
Thank you. This feels like a very natural conversation. I feel like it's about time that we put this out there because I feel like we have so many productive conversations, and you've helped me throughout my college career and now my professional career. And I think it's a very natural start to talk about imposter syndrome. It's kind of what I think kicked off a lot of these conversations. And you kind of informed me about this at a young age, and I went with it and did some research. And I think it's something that a lot of women and men can relate to in the workforce. And I think it's one of the conversations that I always draw on when I'm talking to my colleagues and friends. So I think that's what we're kicking off today. And Meghan, if you could just go over kind of those feelings of imposter syndrome and what that initial conversation was.
Okay, thanks so much. And she downplayed it. She said she did some research. I believe you did your whole honors thesis on imposter syndrome in virtual settings. So we will definitely get into that. You know, imposter syndrome is so pervasive. I think there's a belief that it's primarily something that younger women in particular struggle with. But I can tell you, having worked with executives, directors on boards, people at the highest stage of their career, it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And it turns out that men struggle with this as much as men. And so let's define it first. Imposter syndrome is that pervasive feeling that you're not qualified for a position or you're not as smart as people think you are. And so if you hold this belief, you're constantly doubting yourself whenever you're showing up in meetings. And the opposite side of that, which I think we're going to talk about in another episode, is executive presence. You cannot be fully present and immersed in the moment if you're dealing with this talk track of, uh-oh, they're about to find out that I really do not have the answer. It is so distracting and it is such a massive energy sink. Ryan, can you think of a time when it has come up for you, whether it was in school or maybe you were interviewing for a job or in your current role?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fact that having the conversation and having a label for it is so validating. So I'm glad that we kind of had that conversation because then I've been able to identify those feelings throughout my life and know that it's a very common thing. But yeah, tons to pull from. But one in particular, I think, was going to grad school. And, when you're in grad school, you're in a room with people from all different backgrounds. I was straight out of undergrad. I took a gap year. But I was in the room with people that had 5+ years of working experience, and we were thrown in projects together. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, what can I add here? I shouldn't even be in this room because I'm not adding value as much as they are. They've got 5+ years. So you sit there and you kind of internalize this. You're not speaking up as much. So that's definitely an area where I struggle with it. And I think, in my research, grad school is a time where, because you have such different backgrounds, but you're all thrown into a same setting and expected to do the same level of work, it can feel overwhelming and just, feeling like at any point they're going to realize maybe like, how did they get in? Like, why are they even here in the first place?
Mhm.
And those feelings I've had throughout in work, and you get thrown into a room and you're with older colleagues, or I know, speaking with my friends, they get thrown into a room with senior partners, and just feeling like they look at you and they know that you have no idea what you're talking about, or that you shouldn't be there in the first place. So it's a very common feeling. And it's validating in ways that it is so common, but it's tough to address. And I think an important distinction that you and I have talked about is how to address the feelings of, is feeling an imposter different from not feeling confident? And how does that play out in the workplace or in your
That
profession?
is Yes, that is such an important distinction. You know, if you are nervous, you're in an interview or you are in grad school, or you're in a work situation, and you're looking around the room and you're thinking, I am the youngest person here, or I've only been here for a couple of months. And you're wondering, confidence is you're worried about what others will think of you. You're not, that's being with lack of confidence. Imposter syndrome is you already know what they should think of you, that you don't have anything to offer, that you don't have the experience, that you're somehow in this room by mistake. And recognizing that distinction is so critical because more than recognizing what it is, I want to give you and everyone else tools on what you can do. So if you're feeling a lack of confidence, my favorite thing to do, and I do this myself because I struggle with confidence and imposter syndrome too. It never really goes away. We're going to talk about how to break up with it. If you're not feeling confident about something, I want you to ask 3 questions. Number one, do I care about this issue? Maybe I'm going to brief people on in a team meeting, or maybe I'm talking to someone else about an issue. Do I care about the issue? Number two, do I like or even respect the audience? Now, to get to yes to this question, you need to know who they are. You don't have to be best buddies with them. You don't have to be on coffee run status, but you at least have to know enough about their role, their perspective as a leader, that they have hard choices to make about where to allocate resources, what to prioritize. So, if you know enough about where they're coming from, you can get to yes on number two. And the third question is, will my talking about this issue help the audience? So when you're thinking about a lack of confidence, work on getting to yes to those questions. Do I care about the issue? Is it specific and compelling enough? Do I respect and like the audience? Will talking about this issue help the audience? So that's how we get to getting to be more confident. When it comes to imposter syndrome, this is much deeper and more pervasive. And some of the brightest minds and celebrities, Einstein, Meryl Streep, Maya Angelou, all of these people struggle with the imposter syndrome. And there's a professor out at UC Berkeley, Don Moore, who wrote a book on confidence where he addresses these issues. And he said, the people who struggle with the imposter syndrome are those who shouldn't. So I say this as a reminder of, if you are a little bit more on guard of being prepared and being more thoughtful about when, why, and how you speak, oh my gosh, we would all benefit from that, right? So it's a way of keeping you sharp. But if you get to that moment where you have these almost crippling beliefs, I want you to write down what you think that truth is. And there's research out of University of Colorado, I need to cite this person, who talks about when you write down your fears, it takes away so much of the power because you get this reality check. And, the other day I was doing a spring cleaning of my office and I came across a lot of the notes that I took when I was writing my book, The Reluctant Presenter, which, as we see, I took it across the finish line. It's out there. But I wrote this note saying, a big fear that I was going to spend so much time. We were talking getting up at 4 a.m. for months to write before my family woke up, missing weekends with my husband and daughter, taking away from work with Portico. I wrote this fear, I will waste all of this time and it won't be a good book. And it will have just set me back in so many other aspects of my life and I will look foolish. And, I even reading at the time, I was like, well, Megan, that's not going to happen. You've got the support structure. So if you were really struggling with those fears, write it down. And then the other thing that can be helpful is to set really low bars of success in your next meeting. And this is not something you're going to solve yourself. So one thing you could do is, if you have a team meeting, you can talk to your manager, a colleague, and say, what do we need to get out of this? And talk it through with them. Do not do this on email. Do not do this on Slack. You even talking with them is a way of rehearsing, seeing validation with their head nods or eye contact and getting their feedback, so that by the time you're speaking up in a meeting, it's not the first time you've done it.
Yeah.
So Ryan, my question for you is, when I see you in working situations, you come across as poised and confident. So clearly you've figured out a thing or two. What do you do when you feel like you're struggling?
Yeah, I think in the first place, I have to remind myself I'm there for a reason, even if it's just for what I have on paper and that's all they see. Like I'm in the room for a reason. And the rest of that is kind of, I don't know if I love the faking it till you make it because I do present myself authentically, but at some degree, I'm definitely not. I'm kind of shielding a little bit of the anxiety and the nerves that I'm feeling in a room, and I'm also very honest. If I don't know something, I admit it. I'm still very young in my career, and I think there's no shame in admitting to not knowing something, and then after the meeting, going and finding out the answer. And I think just being curious and continuing to learn and ask in my professional career, and then also my personal career, but also just having conversations like this with you and your professional experiences. I think that has really equipped me to battle some of these on my own. So, I've learned lessons from you that I can kind of avoid and dodge. And then I've, been in rooms where I've learned my own lessons. And I think, yeah, I have to back myself with, even if it's just reminding myself of things I've accomplished so far and, the excitement about what I am to do and being very honest about what I do and don't know has been really helpful in kind of combating that imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. That there's so much power in admitting to that you don't know. We were working with third year law associates, and you want to talk about a group of high achieving, high strung, ambitious um, professionals. And, I almost wanted to hug some of them because they were so wired up. And we worked out an exercise of saying, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I'll get back to you. Which seems kind of obvious. Like, of course, you should be able to say, I don't know. But what I have seen, and I love that you've addressed this so early in your career, because I tell you, I work with people in their 40s and in their 50s, and we still feel like we're in school. And there's great value in my first graders now doing it with book reports. Like, you get in front of a room and you talk about what you learned, and there's this feeling of you're being tested. And so that is one of the big drivers why people do not show up as confidently, or they feel like they have imposter syndrome, because you know what? You're never going to have all of the answers. It is not a matter of if, it is when someone's going to ask you a question. And so you can take it from the perspective of, oh, this is a gotcha moment. Like, I knew this was going to happen. Or you can say, I don't know, but I'm going to find that out for you.
Mhm.
Because there's a difference between being prepared and being a perfectionist. And the people who have imposter syndrome often resort to perfectionism as this false sense of control. We think that if we make things absolutely perfect, then no one will find fault. And, to the point you raised just now, we want more than ever for our leaders and our colleagues to be authentic. And you cannot be a perfectionist and authentic at the same time. It's two sides
Mhm.
of the same coin. Like, you just can't do it.
Right. Yeah, and I have a question for you, Megan, because I think it comes up in, in your early career, it's hard to get critical feedback, whether that be from your manager or a colleague. How do you battle that and taking that and, wanting to improve on that, but also not internalizing that as feeling like you're inadequate or you are an imposter and like, oh, they've caught me and they now know that I do not belong here.
Um, in organizations where they have a culture of constant feedback, it becomes less of that sting or an attack. Because I do this. I see reviews of when I do speaking engagements, and I had one where there were 600 reviews, and there was one person who did not give me the highest rating. I'm not saying this to be like, oh, I'm this great speaker, but I
What you want
dwelled, and I could tell you word for word why they did not like my presentation. And
Mhm.
so I've summarily dismissed everyone else who saw there was value of it. And there's this tendency to perseverate on it. So, what you can do in your role is to talk to your manager about feedback, and say, this is something that I am open to, I want to get better at. I can tell you it is the thing that managers like to do the least. And when I was writing this book and did a chapter on feedback, I almost didn't do the chapter because the research was so depressing. Because so often when people get it wrong, it alienates the manager and the employee will go want to work for someone else or work for another job if it doesn't go well. And so what you can do to set it up is invite it and say, I would like to get a better idea of what's going well and what I might be able to work on. So then you're trying to, because you also want to know what are your strengths. If someone is giving you feedback and it feels like it's coming out of the blue and it's unsolicited, that's where you want to draw on some internal self care of taking a breath. I will grab a pen or just something to kind of center and take a deep breath and tell myself, ask, is this person doing this out of, do they have my back or do they have the audience's back? Or are they actually trying to make me look bad? Are they not coming from a great supportive place? 99.9% of the time, the person is trying to be constructive and giving you, but at least acknowledging that, is this person friend or foe?
Mhm.
And if it is friend, it's simply absorbing it, realizing you don't have to react in the moment. You can always get a follow-up time with them. If it is someone who is, and I've had this in workshops. I've had people say like, this isn't going to work for me. I don't even know, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't happen a lot, but I go back to the default phrase. I have a default phrase to go and say, look, if what you are doing is working for you, if you are closing all of the deals that you need, if you are getting approvals on your projects, continue with what you are doing. But if you think there's room for improvement, maybe try some of these ideas. And that way you can deflate some of the tension in the room.
I like that. That's very helpful. Now, and I always think about this because sometimes it feels like imposter syndrome is such a negative, and you talk about battling it or trying to control it. Are there any scenarios where it can be beneficial? I know you mentioned earlier, all these famous and incredible thought leaders, they have feelings of imposter syndrome and they seem to have come to great success. So, what are the benefits, if any, of, these feelings of an imposter?
If you can use it, turn it into your superpower of, I am never going to take for granted that people want to hear from me. I'm never going to take for granted that I know everything. That keeps us curious. So if you can, temper the anxiety with, I'm going to help this person. We're going to figure it out. They're not testing me. I think it keeps you on edge in a good way. You can ask any professional athlete, any Olympian, any actor, top of their career, they still have that level of anxiety. In fact, Saturday Night Live, when they were doing their 50th anniversary, they had a whole skit on anxiety and how they went through 50 years. And the most famous skits, the stand-up comedians were like, oh my gosh, that was terrifying for me. So it's a reminder of, if you can temper it, it will also keep you open to being curious, which means you're going to learn from everyone you meet with, which is only going to make your work better and you someone who's easier to collaborate with, which everyone wins. Let's do, we're each going to give one piece of advice. So, Ryan, what's your headline? What's your one piece of advice of someone who says they're struggling with imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think having conversations just like this, I think especially early on in your career, find a close colleague or a friend, it doesn't have to be at work, and just have that conversation. And it allows you to be seen in a way and also have that feeling of camaraderie and validation. And it feels like you're not alone in those feelings. So that would be my advice because I think it's been so beneficial for me in my career and in my life.
Absolutely. And building on that, I would say build your network at work. This is especially true if you are in hybrid or remote. The more you get to know your colleagues, you're going to do a couple of things. You're going to have more practice talking about your work. You are going to know the backstories of all of the issues. You're going to be more tapped into the politics in a good way of what's going on. And so the more you can get to know your colleagues as friends, the easier it's going to be to show up, the more comfortable you are, and the more support you're going to have for one another. So that wraps up our first edition of Office Hours. Let us know in the comments what questions you have, and we will answer them. Thanks so much.
Thanks.